Hello and welcome back to Hacking Pro Tips number 12. Today I have the pleasure of sitting down with Sam Curry, ZLZ on HackerOne, who I guess right now, I haven't checked this today, Sam, but when I was doing the recon for this, it was 37 bugs on pretty much public programs, which is really impressive. You and I had a chance to connect at DEF CON, and it was awesome to meet you, and really appreciate you taking the time to sit down and do this. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, definitely.
On that note, the first question that I typically start off with is kind of how did you get started into hacking? What got you onto HackerOne?
Okay, so yeah, about 3 or 5 years ago, I was really interested in this game called RuneScape, and it's a game where there's an economy, you can level up and stuff, and the game runs on like a Java client, and it kind of gets a little technical if you want to mess with it. So in the community, there's like, just normal players, and then there's kind of a group of people who started messing with the clients and trying to find vulnerabilities in the game to either like level up their character faster or I guess potentially like gain items quickly, things like that. So I found myself in that community, and like everybody there was pretty technical, and there's like a whole different side of the game, and I kind of really found my way into that community and really loved it. And when it comes to RuneScape, messing with a client and messing with that is actually really, really similar to web server pen testing. The way I look at it is honestly like the series of steps to get invisibility, for instance, on RuneScape is kind of similar to lining up steps to, I don't know, find some server-side vulnerability. And to me, it's really exciting. And I kind of get the exact same thrills I did when I played, that game and stuff like that. So eventually, in one of the chats, someone had challenged like the first one to get like a cross-site scripting vulnerability on a public program. So I really got into that, and I beat him actually, and I was really impressed with it. And a couple weeks later, I received a payout, and I was just like, whoa, it's kind of a big deal, because like to me it was a fine that took a little bit, but like the payout was a huge incentive, I guess, to like actually look into it a bit more. I just thought like bug bounty was like, $10 there, $20 there, get a T-shirt, whatnot. But it was really interesting.
So let's dig into that a little bit, because I'm actually really curious about it. So
Yeah,
with
of
the
course.
game, like what did that look like for you? Like in terms of like that methodology of kind of breaking things apart and going at them, like. Was it just one day you were kind of like, how are people doing this? And you started asking questions, or were you kind of digging yourself? What did that look like in terms of going from zero to that stage to then moving on to the bug bounty programs?
Okay, yeah. So in the game, I had kind of made friends, either by accident or just maybe on purpose. I really don't remember, with people who were involved in the same activities. So when I first got into that, what it actually looked like was it was kind of more just understanding how the game worked. It wasn't anything too technical. I wasn't like trying to pull apart the client or anything. But at first, what it was a series of actions that was like permitted. For instance, you click log out, and then right before you log out, you move a couple steps, so your character is like glitched when you log back in. So then you have the ability to do X or Y. It was more trying to find out things that would. Well, for instance, in the game you have interfaces. Each interface has like a specific ID. So sometimes, like, if you open multiple interfaces and you were able to click a couple items, you may teleport somewhere that you're not allowed to teleport and smuggle items from a minigame or something. So it was really exciting, because you're trying to find all these things you can work with in order to like exfiltrate items or steal content. It's kind of the same. To me, it's like the exact same thrill. It's weird, but yeah.
No, it definitely resonates, right? It's the idea of like somebody's developed something, and you're essentially just trying to use it in a way that they did not intend for you to use it, right? And so to me, it's very analogous to hacking. I can see where there's a consistency in terms of the approach.
Yeah, completely. And I think I forgot about the part where I got into like web server pen testing, because that's
Right.
a kind of a big transition. A really long time ago, I met this guy named CryptoToad, or Jill Krolikowski was his handle, and he was talking about like pen testing these private forums for other RuneScape sites and stuff like that. And although it was a little malicious, I think like the whole community was involved in stuff like that, and I'm not saying it was permitted actions. It was definitely like unethical to do, but like we were attacking, PHP like MyBB forums with like ODAs that were popping up, and I really wanted to like learn more about that because like one day he links me a site that we hated, and he's like, oh, here's this site, it's completely defaced, and it was more like cloak and dagger because there was no adults in the community. It was like 16, 17-year-olds running forums, and everybody knew each other, and it was kind of like politics and whatnot. But
Okay.
one day he showed me this tool called SQL Map, and
Okay.
I had no clue what I was doing. So he was just like, oh yeah, here's this website for you to look at, and it's like one of these intentionally vulnerable web servers. And so I'm just making up IDs and throwing SQL Map. I had no clue what I was doing.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, from there I kind of learned about everything, and it really got me into it.
So what did that look like? What was that step, that progression where learning about everything? How did that go for you?
Okay, it was really hard at first because like again I think I didn't know as many hackers don't the actual logic behind what SQL Map was doing. It was a kind of a hard start because I was just given tools and whatnot, and I was just told, yeah, this is this and this is this. Well, I think a better approach would have been, okay, here's how HTTP works, here's what's actually
Yeah.
going on. I'm going to expose you to PHP and all this stuff. And eventually I did get exposed to PHP, MySQL, because I was curious because I knew what the tool was based on. I knew what I was attacking most of the time, and I started developing in that because I wanted to get a better insight to like actually what's going on.
Nice. Yeah, those are conversations that I've had with others as well. And the value of understanding kind of what's going on behind the scenes. Like it's easy to kind of poke at things, but at least for me, if I can't visualize kind of what's going on or what, say, a developer might have done, it makes it a lot harder for me to figure out, well, maybe I could try this or maybe I could go that route as well.
Yeah, I
Um,
completely understand.
it's interesting that you raised that as well. So I want
Yeah.
to I want to switch gears just a little bit, and I want to talk about kind of your success coming onto HackerOne, particularly with Yahoo, because I find it to be amazing. Yahoo is a pretty mature program. They obviously have a massive landscape, but they've been running a bug bounty program for a long time. So to kind of come brand new into bug bounties. And really have such success. I'm curious. What made you choose Yahoo, and why do you think you've been so successful there?
I think when I first started pen testing, I didn't really have many programs to choose from, and Yahoo is this huge, it's this massive giant with a huge scope, and I think everybody kind of at some point in their career looked at Yahoo, but I decided to get into Yahoo not because the way I looked at it was that it was just this old mature program that was dead and there were no bugs left to find. Because at that point, when I started Bug Bounty, I really didn't understand the concept behind programs mature, the bugs are gone. So I kind of just opened it up and started looking. But my first couple bugs were pretty low severity. The payout was $500 for them, which I mean, for Yahoo, like they rate it. I have a public report for Twitter for vulnerability called 401 injection, and I think this is what kind of really got me into Yahoo because I reported a 401 injection not knowing whether or not Yahoo would accept it, and they paid out $500. So I was really impressed with their program, and I started digging into it a bit more.
So let's talk about that for those that are unfamiliar. What does the 401 injection look like?
Okay, so the way the browser handles requests is kind of weird at some points because if you try to go to a website that responds with HTTP 401 simple like login, which is pretty much when you visit a website and there's a pop-up that looks like a JavaScript alert that says please enter your username and password.
Hmm.
What you're able to do with most browsers, and I think it's dying now, Chrome, you're not able to do this anymore. Firefox, the latest version, you're not able to do this anymore, but Safari, you're still able to do this, is let's say I have a website, sam.com, and then I have a website, malicious.com. What I can do if I have posting access to sam.com, like let's say I can upload an image, right? And the way I can upload an image is it uploads the image is turned into a URL, and then I send the post request with the URL. If I'm able to change that URL in transit, and I can change it to anything from attacker.com, I'm able to prompt people to log in on sam.com, and then it asks for their credentials on there. So it's just a way of phishing, but it's kind of more technical.
Nice. And that pop-up, the whole idea is that it's inherently trusted, let's say, by most people
Yeah,
because it looks like it's coming from sam.com when really it's going to send their credentials to attacker.com, right?
exactly. Yep.
It's so I found that really interesting when I read about your blog post, and then I heard about your success on it because I also read about it in the Tangled Web, which was written in 2011. So it wasn't like this was
Yeah.
like a hidden bug, right? Like this was known. Why do you think you had the success with it where others didn't? Was it a matter of them not looking for it, or are you finding different areas to particularly like hone in and go after that type of injection?
I feel like it was a matter of people just not looking for it because, again, my experience was kind of like, PHPB, pen testing, all these like old form softwares. And one common thing people did back then, I guess, is just setting a image that prompts for a 1 on like a forum post or something. And then they were trying to steal people's logins on the forum and things like that. And I was curious whether or not that would be like a valid vulnerability in Yahoo. So I was like, yeah, whatever, I'll try it. And it turns out they do pay for it. So that was really awesome.
Nice, that's awesome. And I mean, congrats. That's a great initial bounty, right? Like,
Yeah,
there are a
yeah.
lot of people that I talk to that don't have that type of success. So I would really want to emphasize that for you. That's awesome to kind of kick it off.
Yeah, thank you.
So on that note of blog posts, you've shared quite a bit, and I find them particularly interesting for a variety of reasons, not just kind of like, here's how I hack something, but you talk a lot about different methodologies and kind of your mindset as you work through stuff, which I think is super helpful for people that are kind of developing. So I wanted to kind of to dig into that. And one of your blog posts is on Yahoo's Chef Docker configurations and whatnot. And you had a line in there that mentioned that you like to keep a text document of interesting endpoints and files. I'm really curious what that looks like for you. Like, A, why do you do it? But B, how do you actually incorporate that into hacking? Go back to it? Do you go back to it? Like, what does that look like?
Okay, so when I start hacking, like I kind of get a feel for the application and stuff like that, and I'll use it intentionally. And sometimes maybe I'll run into something that's interesting, so I'll copy that URL. And even when I'm not like in my pen testing stage where I'm like attacking things, I find it interesting, so I save it. So what the text file looks like is it's nothing too crazy, like specifically formatted where I have titles and whatnot. But I kind of paste it in there, and most of the time I'll remember what it is. Like for instance, let's say I find a page which is handling orders, and I throw it in apostrophe, and it hangs forever. And I don't really know what it's doing, but apostrophe is the only thing that make it hang. So like, let's say later I want to go test it for SQL injection or test it for some sort of injection. So I'll just save it and go back to it. But most of the time I'll be looking at things that are more interactive with more immediate results. So I don't want to dig in too deep to things that may be just confusing at first. So I'll just kind of have a progression in my head of what to do, what first, what not to do.
Is there like a threshold that you have for that type of thing? Like, what would stop you? Like, I know for me, like if I see that type of behavior, it's almost like I become obsessive about it. Like I can't move beyond that until I confirm kind of what's going on.
Yeah.
How does it look like for you? Like, is there a certain type of thing where it's kind of like, you spend 5 or 10 minutes on it and then you make a note about it, or is it just that like you're kind of zoned in on, I'm going to check out this entire application, so I'm going to work through things and just note them. Like, what does that look like?
I'll spend 5-10 minutes on it. It really depends what the interaction is. For instance, like a hanging, when I send it apostrophe, I kind of thought about it in my head for a little bit. One of the things like I'll think about is like, okay, what's actually going on the server? For instance, on Luminate, I was pen testing I think the way it handled payment methods, and one of the things was like a query to select your payment methods. And I realized that, okay, it looks like it's being done through like a third-party service because I've never seen any sort of request to Yahoo about storing it on Yahoo. It's always been a third-party website, and so I assumed that like they're using some sort of API and that I wasn't able to see output directly. So I kind of thought about it a little bit. I realized I didn't want to really spend my whole night on that because I wanted to see the rest of the application. So I kind of just throw that away.
Do you
But
ever? Sorry, no, go ahead. But you do.
Oh yeah, take 10-15 minutes to look at it beforehand.
So for me, and this is something that took a while to kind of get past, where it's kind of like now I've calmed down and it's like, okay, I don't have to report everything in the 1 minute after that I find it. But do you ever have that feeling where you kind of get anxious about, if I walk away from this, somebody else could find it?
Yeah, I do sometimes. I've had some mistakes where I will submit a vulnerability like just really quick because I have this pressure that like there's 10 other hackers like directly on that vulnerability, and it's kind of stressful sometimes. Recently, I submitted a report where on Luminate there's web hosting, and there's just a bunch of websites that you can sign up for, and one of the plugins is a live chat thing that's innately installed on the website. And I found this thing where you can pretend to be the administrator and start live chats with any customer on any website. And I didn't submit it as that at first, actually. I submitted it as an IDOR. I said, I found out this issue where you could pull information about other websites, and that was it. And I said, okay, here's an IDOR. And then I'm like, wait, please don't fix this yet. Or like, not please don't fix this, but give me 10 minutes. I'm going to try to leverage it really quick. So then like the whole report, it's just comments on like additional proofs of concept for here's how you do this, here's how you fetch chat logs and stuff. The report's resolved, so I'm free to talk about it.
Yeah.
But yeah.
How do you think they took that with the different comments kind of coming in?
It was about 2 or 3 in the morning, so I feel like that initially they didn't see it, but probably when they read the report, they probably laughed a few times because it's kind of. I always try to do my reports really professionally, but at the end I'll usually leave like a note saying like, you know, this issue was fun for me or whatever. I thought this issue was new, and I kind of try to keep a close relationship with the team because I feel like it helps for, let's say you misunderstand something or whatnot. But the first comment was kind of lighthearted, so I assume they kind of took it and they understand what was going on my side.
Nice. On that note, the comments and the relationship building with Yahoo, have you found that to be successful? Has that helped you in your bug bounties?
Yeah, completely. It doesn't ever like there's no real financial incentive to, you know, establish a relationship. I feel like maybe there's like one time I may have heard someone like talking about like that way, but that's not true at all. I think it just really helps to have a professional relationship and like know who you're talking to, because let's say you get their personal contact and you find an issue and you say, hey, I know this is out of scope, but it's very impactful. For instance, like you find cross-site request forgery on a program that doesn't allow it, but it can delete all the user's content or something.
Yeah.
So maybe you throw them a text message and say, hey, should I report this? Should I not report this? It's out of scope, yada, yada. But yeah, it definitely does help. And it was really awesome because there were a few Yahoo team members at H1702, and I was able to interact with them in person and kind of said, hey, I'm ZLZ, and they kind of laughed a bit and said, oh, nice to meet you. We read reports.
Nice. And so I've had those situations too, where we get to meet teams, and I think there's something to be said for that, right? Like putting faces to names, kind of know who you're talking about, so it's not just a screen. But then B, that kind of communication, those questions. There are a number of programs that have like security emails for you to ask, and I've had those situations as well where it's like we don't want to hear about cross-site request forgery, but then when you can wipe out every user on their platform based on, you know, some automation for it. I guess an admin, it's yeah, it makes a big difference.
Yeah, completely.
So on that same blog post, you also mentioned about using Subroot and some of the tools like, you know, dir search and what have you. I'm curious, when you're running those, is that just you going to the kind of command line, kicking them off, and then coming back to the application, or do you have any type of automation around that? Like, and how do you look at the results? Like, what does that process look like for you?
As of now, I really don't have too much automation. One of my initial approaches in bug bounty on Yahoo is that everybody's hit the landing page or every other page, and especially those random subdomains that look juicy. Everybody's hit those with at least a dozen scanners. So I felt like, at least at first, that automation really wouldn't be productive. But the tools that I use, Subroot and dir search, I think I actually use Sublister, but I don't necessarily use those to automate like my entire approach, just like reconnaissance. And I really like to dig deep in what I'm looking at. But right now I'm trying to learn Node.js. So what I'm doing is I'm actually developing like application to, you know, store URLs and potentially tie it with like a command line and hit scan. I think Jack, Cable, and Ibram are working on similar applications, but for me it's kind of more of a learning experience and something just to set up. But I really look forward to the day when I can script well enough that like it's productive, if you know what I mean.
Yep, absolutely. There's definitely like, I know for me, every time, like, I don't do it enough, so that every time I go back, it's like, oh shit, like what was the command to do this, or what was the command to do that, and so it's like 5 minutes for lookup, 2 minutes for coding, and then yeah, if you don't stick to it, it just ends up becoming a time suck, right?
Yeah, completely.
Versus finding bugs. So I guess in terms of like reviewing the output, it's just a manual review type thing for you, right? Output it to a text file and then kind of take a look at what's kind of juicy there.
Yep. What I've started doing is using like a API that screenshots the website, so I can just
Okay.
kind of get a general idea. That's just with my Node.js application. I'll probably push it if like anyone, whatever, like wants to see it. It's nothing too crazy, but it just screenshots the website. If it's a valid website, it tells you if it's open or closed. So a lot of the times, if like subdomain is closed on 80 or 443, I like to port scan the entire thing just to see if it's running anything else. But yeah, it's pretty much manual output for the most part for now.
So when you say port scan it, will you look at all ports, or are you just looking at like the major like first top 1,000 type thing?
Most of the time, I'll just do top 1,000. I mean, like it's usually nothing beyond that unless I am really invested in a certain subdomain or something like that. I mean, I think every hacker has probably ran into a subdomain or service that just, like let's just say like DB test 01 or something like that. And you're like, okay, what's this? And then you scan all of it just because potentially there is possibly something crazy running on some test dummy port.
Yeah, no, exactly. The tool that you're using for screenshotting, is that like Eyewitness, or what are you using there?
For just to demo it, it was I think it was just like some API that had a limited number of requests.
Okay.
It was like I had like 10,000 requests for it. I didn't actually make it myself, but what I'm looking into is just like maybe hopefully finding like a Node.js or PHP library to like automate that on my side, so it loads it.
Nice. So, I mean, kind of the last thing, kind of like out of pulling out all these different kind of ideas, but you mentioned talking with Yobert in the Pomodoro Technique. So, yeah, you want to kind of just take a minute, kind of explain what that is and how you've used that, why you find it helpful?
Yeah, of course. So Yobert mentioned at H1702 the Pomodoro Technique, and I was kind of curious like what he was talking about. So what it actually is, it's for 30 minutes you have 25 minutes of intense focus, and then for 5 minutes you kind of get up and walk around. And I feel like that really helps in bug bounty because like when you're looking at like an application or whatnot, you can usually find, let's say, something that you don't understand at first, and you'll try everything everything on the top of your head, but when you get up and walk around for 5 minutes, you realize, oh, I forgot this, or oh, I forgot that, and then you go back to the application and look at it a little bit more.
Right on. And so for you, have you found that's had a significant impact on kind of like how you approach bug bounties? Like before, was it like you sitting down for say like hours on an end, and this kind of
So it did have like for at least 2 bounties, it had a significant difference because I'd been looking at those endpoints for a really long time, and so let's say instead of having a session where I look at it for like 2 or 3 hours, I'll get up and kind of change my environment to change how I think, and then come back to that. And I did resolve like exploit the issue finally.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, and it's you hear about it talked about a lot in terms of like the shower thoughts, right? Like you kind of go, you clear your head. For me, it's walking the dog, and then actually earlier in the week, I was on the train to work, decided to close my eyes, completely unrelated to hacking, and then all of a sudden it was like, oh, if I do this, that's a vulnerability. So as soon as I kind of got to the office, I went and wrote it up, but it was totally unexpected. I found it so interesting because I am the type of person that will sit there for hours, not find something, get super frustrated, and then when I walk the dog, it's kind of like things occur to me. So I'm really interested to try out the technique, and I would encourage others to do it based on kind of the success that you've had as well as Yobert. You had the post which was looking at Chef and Docker, and let's dig into that. So you were talking about exploiting a server-side request forgery on Yahoo, and so this was one that was previously fixed. You and Tommy had found it, right?
Yep.
So let's talk about that. Can you give us a brief overview of what that looked like finding initially, and kind of what prompted you to look there, and then how you actually found the vuln? Because I thought it was interesting.
Yeah. So when I was pen testing Illuminate a really long time ago with Tommy, I was just kind of by myself for a little bit looking at services, and I decided to purchase web hosting. And one of the interesting things about the web host was there's an image posted of the website, and it's kind of like I was talking about screenshotting websites. This is how I got the idea to screenshot websites, but they had used a tool to screenshot a specific endpoint. So I kind of inspect element or just drag the image to the URL so it would open up and I'd be able to see the endpoints. And it looked like it was just this tool called WebShots, and you gave it a URL and it would take a picture of it. So we tried it with Google, we tried it with a bunch of stuff. We sent it a bunch of internal Yahoo domains. And at first, when I say we, I think it was just me looking at it at first. I got super burnt out because I had spent like 2 or 3 hours just and didn't really have a clue what to do. But I sent it over to Tommy when I really didn't understand, and he was actually attending Amazon Web Services meetup at the time, which is really interesting for the vulnerability. So Tommy spoke to Yobert a little bit and about Amazon Web Services. Yeah. And I really didn't think too much to look into what the server was running on. I think I was just too invested into trying to pull up localhost or whatnot. So I was just you could just whatever, you can look at it. I'll be back. And then a couple minutes later, he's like, "Oh, this is really bad, really bad." And then I'm like, "Okay." And then he submits it. But basically, there were if you don't know anything about Amazon Web Services, there's a metadata IP URL, which includes just some information about the web server that it's running on. And one of the things we're able to do is create an IAM user, which is a user that's able to have certain permissions to connect through AWS command line, I think it is. But the user account must have been able to, I think it had permission to a lot of their stuff, so they awarded a decent amount to that.
Yeah,
it's like their identity access management control system, right? It depends on because they have a whole wide range of permissions that you can have to it, and if people set things up incorrectly, you can end up having an account that just has blanket permission to everything.
Yeah.
So nice, that's awesome. So then your blog post, you had mentioned kind of going back at that one. So what did that look like? Because you talk about using the bit.ly address.
Okay, so when I looked back at that application, I was just curious to see how they fixed it, because it looked like they were still using it in production. Because when I go to an application, I look at it for a while. So I've been on Luminate for about a month, just on the same application, and I saw another screenshot. I'm like, oh, is this going to be the same endpoint, or is it going to be fixed, or are they caching? What are they doing? So I dragged and opened it, and there were no URL parameters, but there was a VBID parameter. And if you don't know anything about Luminate, VBID is kind of a specific, let's say you're in the website editor, it's an element, or it's your entire website. They use it for a lot of things, for instance, a text field, or your entire website. So when you threw it a VBID, it would take a screenshot of that specific thing. So I was curious if I could maybe turn that into something different. So yeah, when it came to the bit.ly address, I guess to explain this first, the first thing I had to do was find a cross-site scripting vulnerability on a website editor, which really wasn't a big or hard or a big deal, because since it was the website editor, it was on your account. So I feel like there were probably reports for cross-site scripting, but they just weren't fixed in a super big amount of time, because at the time it wasn't super serious. Because in order to, I guess, exploit the XSS, you had to be logged in and do it yourself, which is, self-XSS is not the super big deal.
Yeah.
But when you're able to have it seen by the server, then it turns into a big deal, because the fact the server was on the same network as the Amazon Web Services stuff and the internal domains they had, it was able to access that content. So what I did is I just iframed it, and at first it didn't work. So I was curious if it was just checking the content on the page to see if that IP address was there. So I tried messing with it and coding it, and that didn't really work out that well. So what I did is I just used a bit.ly address to redirect to it. So which is just a standard 301 redirect, and then it loaded the content after I did the bit.ly address. So I'm pretty sure it was just checking for content on the page. So
nice.
Yeah,
that's awesome. And so was that one of those ones where you're kind of gone to frantically write it up type thing?
Sort of. I think I had to explain it because I was really excited to write it up, definitely, but it was kind of a more complex amount of steps, because, for instance, it would only take one screenshot of the specific VBID before it cached it or something. So I had to explain you're probably not going to have it working if you send it to the screenshot tool more than once. So you have to create a new element each time and iframe it and do all this stuff. So I made a video for that, wrote up proof of concepts. I just kind of had them side by side just in case there's an issue reproducing. But yeah, there was kind of more quote unquote like frantic reproduction because I actually didn't initially know it could hit those domains, but
Right.
I had the thought in my head, but like I forgot to write it in the report.
Hmm.
I stopped. I knew about the domains when I was like finishing pen testing, but like I didn't try them because I didn't want to be seen as pivoting. Since I already knew it could hit
Yeah.
AWS stuff, I thought it was worth reporting, so I went ahead and reported it.
Nice. That's awesome. Yeah, congrats on that one too. Do you find like do you typically go back after like reports when people say they're fixed type of thing, or do you kind of just let them go to the wayside?
Not really. I don't really ever find myself doing that. I always kind of feel anxious that there's going to be, for instance, like they dupe it or they say
Right.
that it's another user issue because I feel like you're kind of just picking up scraps since maybe it's still in beta when it's being fixed. Like they push it to production, but like they still know there may be an issue, so maybe they're working on that. Uh,
Right.
so I always feel like I'm kind of like you know looking down at like these construction workers and like pulling at stuff, and it's like I don't know.
Yeah, I find it to kind of be tricky, right? Like some programs will ask you to say like, hey, can you validate the fix that we have? Which like in my mind, it's like poke at it, kind of make sure it's good, but I'm not going to spend hours type of thing trying to break it. But when you have situations like this, like it's a fine balance between like validating kind of what they did as opposed to like looking for new methods to break what they did. And I think that's where it divides between validation and new bug, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, completely. And this was like since all the parameters were different and it looked like an entirely different endpoint, I was kind of more intrigued by it because I wasn't pen testing the exact same thing. It was like a completely new system and it handled things differently, so I felt like it would be within reason to look at. So
Nice.
yeah.
That makes sense. Um, Another interesting report that you had, and this one, to be quite like truthful, like I sat there and I was reading it and I was like, ah, man, I don't know if I would report this one, only because I've been burned by it in the past, where programs are like, yeah, no, you need to know UUID, so forget about it. So I mean,
Yeah.
to kind of back that up, I'll give some context for everyone kind of listening. But it was really you found on Luminate the ability where somebody's resetting their passwords. There's a UUID and then like an email address, right? And if you knew that UUID, Luminate wasn't validating the email address or anything else. It was just looking at that UUID, and you could always reset the password, right? Have I got that right?
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. So at first glance, at least for me, I was kind of like, oh, I don't know if I would report that. But I thought your write up and your explanation was kind of bang on. And it was you were talking about once you get that UUID, it's like a permanent takeover, right? I'll
Yep.
kind of like turn it over to you, and you can kind of walk us through what it looked like and how you
Okay.
found it.
So I was kind of messing with the password reset on Lemonade because sometimes people have botched password resets, and it appeared this one was a little botched, but nothing too bad. Uh, when I was testing it, I sent a password reset to myself, and I opened it in my email, and then I kind of opened up Burp and intercepted it before it sent when I was trying to change my password. And one of the values was a UUID, and it had like the email as well, but for some reason I think the email was just like read only, so it like fetched the email to display it, and then
Right.
it passed the UUID was the control variable on whether or not or like what it would change. But like
Hmm.
the reason it worked was because when you reset your password yourself, it would create like a one-time verification token that you use to reset the password, but it was tied to all UIDs. So like you could use the one-time thing for any account. Uh, it's interesting because the UID was not predictable. It was a really random piece of data that was alphanumeric, and it would take a really ridiculous amount of requests to ever brute force one, and especially with a one-time token, it's a very hard thing to do. But I kind of realized that one, I would have to find the UID being used somewhere, so you could potentially leverage XSS to permanent account takeover, or two, I would have to find another use for the account takeover. And I kind of spun around in my chair a little bit, and I realized, okay, this looks like it could be like a permanent account takeover. So like as a hacker, I kind of realized that, like let's say you're in someone's Gmail account, and the Gmail account has a UID listed. If you're able to steal that UID, you now have a permanent account takeover. So with web hosting, it's kind of a more high priority thing, I guess, where you want to get your account back and whatnot, and like it's kind of bad if there's an attacker in there. But
Mhm.
most of the time for these account takeovers, like you're able to just lock someone out in the click of a button and say, hey, no, I need to change my password, and then you're good to go. But like as an attacker, I think it'd be really, really, really cool to like be able to just go back in there and hit the button and then take their account back over. So I was like, this really shouldn't exist because it's not its intended purpose. And maybe they have somewhere where you can fetch UUIDs that Illuminate team knows about and I don't. So I just went ahead and reported it.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point, right? Like, where I've run into those situations, like I said, like the one time I reported it and I was told, hey, you can't guess a UUID, and then I went and found a way that they were disclosing it, right? And in my initial report, I mentioned that, like that was my justification was, I know these are unguessable, but you're probably going to be leaking them somewhere. And it was a good prompt, a good learning experience for me to kind of dig a little deeper. Here, I thought like my initial reaction was different from kind of what I got after the fact, and I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of reporting it.
Is that here's why this is so bad.
And I would assume that Yahoo agreed with you because they awarded you a good chunk of change.
Yeah.
Good 4 figures, right?
Yep. Go ahead.
No. I was going to actually switch gears and ask you another question, kind of about working with Tommy, Dougie G. And kind of what that looks like from the collaboration standpoint, because it sounds like it's not the first time that you've collaborated with other hackers, kind of going back to the gaming world. So what does that look like when you guys are working together? Because I know by the sounds of it, you've done it on more than one occasion.
Yeah, when me and Tommy work together, it's really fun because we have different ways to approach an application, and we kind of have different mindsets, and a lot of the time it's based on like personal preference on what we want to do. So like, let's say one day you're just feeling burnout of doing reconnaissance, and with Tommy, like I'm able to say like, hey, you want to look at this new application with me, and then I kind of get him invested, and then we're kind of going back and forth on looking at new things and finding endpoints and trying to break them and just passing our thoughts back and forth. For instance, like I don't think that the server-side request forgery that I couldn't exploit would have ever been awarded like $9,000 if I didn't like throw it to Tommy, because Tommy knew that something I didn't, and that was the fact I was running on Amazon Web Services, which it seems really basic, and I should have known that, but like I feel like I wouldn't have, and I would just kind of pass it up because I'm not able to hit anything else. So I would have just skipped over that. But when we're actually working together, it's just a Slack conversation, and we're just tossing endpoints back and forth and seeing if, for instance, like one of us has already seen that application before, because we both heavily work in Yahoo, and he has a lot of experience in Yahoo, so it's really nice sometimes just be able to have like someone who understands like the whole system kind of the way I do.
And so for that, is it just kind of like you decide that you want to sit down and hack, and you just kind of ping Tommy and be like, hey, I'm doing this, and then kind of vice versa? Is he doing the same thing with you? So it's kind of like an informal approach?
Yeah, pretty much. We both have somewhat open schedules, so I'll just be like, hey, if you're not busy tonight, hop on like at 11 o'clock and we'll look at application or whatnot. And sometimes like he'll be online and I'll just be like stuck on something, and I'll kind of just drop it to him, or like maybe he'll do the same thing for like asking if I've seen this before or what I've done with this and whatnot, and like findings and specific things. So like a lot of the time we'll have more experience in like different things, so it's just good to have set up.
And so, because no platform out of HackerOne, BugCrowd, Synac has team-based reporting, how do you guys decide who's going to get that rep for the big pass?
Okay, so usually it's the person who exploits it. Like let's say
Okay.
you have XSS that's like inline or something, and like you find a way to bypass it, but if I am not the one who exploited it, and if I'm not the one who popped like alert 1, then I'll just usually let the other person report it. And like I think one of the major things is we're both super mature about it, so it's not like, oh man, like you're stealing my 20 rep, I hate you, yada yada yada. It's like, hey, you did more work than me, so go ahead and report it. And we kind of do the same when it comes to splitting bounties. Like let's say like I find an endpoint that I don't know what it does, and then Tommy spends like 2 hours on it and like is able to SQL inject or cross-site script it. then obviously he's going to get a significant portion because I'm just kind of doing recon. We'll kind of talk about it, but I'm really really open when it comes to payouts, and I really think it's like a good approach to just not be really super stern about it. But obviously, like if you're working with the wrong person, they'll take advantage of that. But like when you're kind of friends, then you know what to do, and you know the splits well enough. So
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's kind of you gotta have that upfront conversation, and kind of everyone's kind of gotta know what's going on, right? Because ultimately you're working towards the same goal, but you're right. Like if someone's putting in double the time, it only makes sense to kind of keep that fair. So how do you think working with like others like Tommy has helped you? Has it made you a better hacker? Have you learned new things? Like what does that look like from a learning perspective?
yeah, completely. It changed the way I approach applications because like the more you work with someone, the more you understand their techniques and what works for them, and you kind of incorporate to what works for you. I feel like I've learned a bit about like how to approach an application and the fact of understanding the actual server, because one of the things a lot of people don't necessarily do is like look into whether it's running Apache or Nginx or whatever. So then when it comes to exploiting that server-side request forgery, they don't know, like for instance, let's say Gopher is enabled, and they don't know that at first because they don't understand the back end and whatnot. So working with Tommy has kind of really helped me to approach an application wholesomely as opposed to just like really specifically for the endpoint, and maybe like if it's .php or ASP or whatnot. So
That's really interesting. I've never considered that, to be honest with you. I'm definitely going to fall in that camp of people that are just like, the back end's the back end. I'm just when I'm playing with form inputs. So has that been like an area for you to dig into? Like have you you have those conversations with Tommy and then you kind of go off on your own and do your homework?
yeah, and I think a good example of that would be like the struts to RCE. Now I don't think I ever reported anything with the struts to RCE, but it really shows that like it matters, because like if you see that in a response header and you don't know what to do with it, then well, I guess tough luck, you just missed out on your remote code execution. And if for those unfamiliar with like the struts to remote code execution, it was I think with the content type you're able to supply, it would handle that really weird. So then you're able to achieve like CRLF, RCE, and all this stuff with the response, which was interesting. So struts to is like a Apache thing. So,
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's one of the headers. I can't remember now. But
Yeah.
it's definitely there. It's like the content type. And yeah, you just close off that, and then you can run whatever command you want, and you essentially just own the box. So yeah, that was terrible.
Yeah.
But that kind of reminds me, and actually I don't even think I put it in the notes, but you had the remote code execution with the image manipulation, right? Which is
Yep.
similar. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, of course. It was the exact same thing as the server-side request forgery, except opposite, where Tommy couldn't exploit it, so he sends it to me. So what was going on was like if you're familiar with Image Tragic, it was somewhat similar, but they had a really weird implementation for it. So you were able to supply a URL, and it would crop that URL and do all this stuff with image editing tools. So Tommy looked at it for a while and tried supplying like an image file that had bad content and all this stuff. And I kind of looked at it for a little bit and was curious what was actually going on, because it was obviously image magic based on the responses, and we were able to tell that based on just like past experience and understanding it. And Tommy was just like kind of burnt out because he'd been looking at it for a while. And I looked at it and I kind of thought about it for a little bit. I looked into the way Image Magic handled URLs, and one of the things is you can supply a URL and then it goes inside an image file. And I was just kind of bored, so I'm trying to find a way to explain this, but essentially their implementation was weird. So I decided to just look into the implementation that they had based on just guessing, and I threw some certain characters at it, and I was able to get it to give me a command line output, and then eventually print ls or uname a and whatnot.
So those certain characters, the first one, if I remember correctly from the blog post, was the single quote, right?
Yep.
And then you got an image magic error back. It was kind of like the, oh shit, shouldn't have gotten that back. Yeah, it's
Exactly. Yeah.
And so for those that are kind of new, like there's those kind of special characters that you throw at things to kind of see what's going to happen from a syntax perspective. One of them being kind of the single quote, because you can close off a string there that might be in a command. The double quotes and then the angle brackets if you're looking at HTML and all that kind of stuff. So a few different things there that end up just screwing up syntax. And then if you can screw up syntax, typically you can inject your own thing. Here it happened to be a command for remote code execution, which is awesome.
Yeah.
So kind of on that note, you sharing kind of even this interview, I mean, in the interview, you've really been kind of an open book about the bugs that you found. The blog's an open book about the bugs that you found. So my question is why do that? Why have this blog where you're kind of open and transparent? Why have these types of conversations? What's the end goal for you?
Well, when I first started Bug Bounty, I didn't really know what I was doing a lot of the time. I understood like most of the vulnerabilities and whatnot, but like when it came to Bug Bounty, I didn't know how to necessarily approach a vendor and whatnot. And what I did is I kind of found like one or two people involved in the scene. I sent them a Twitter DM, and most of them really didn't respond. I felt like they probably got like 100 messages a day, and I kind of realized after a while that these people are probably being hit with requests for help all the time, and I really wanted to be able to help people who are just getting started, because I wasn't able to really find that help for myself, and I felt that doing like blogs and being just completely open is a great way for like me to learn as a person and to teach other people, because a lot of times people are going to come to you with issues that they don't understand, and you may not understand at first. So you kind of have to help them out and just say, okay, well, I've never seen this before, but give me some time and I'll look at it. And blog posts are just another way to collaborate with other hackers and kind of share your findings so they can learn from them. And I think it's just an awesome thing to do. And I feel like everybody should be more open about their findings. Otherwise, it kind of creates this sort of like hoarding 0 days type idea or vibe. So.
Yeah, kind of like this culture of secrecy. It's one of the things that I kind of regret. For me, at least, balancing kind of my work, like I'm doing it, side income, right? Like let's be blunt and transparent. You can make good money doing bug bounties, right? And so
Yeah.
The easiest way to get your bang for the buck is going to be typically your private programs. I guess I say that, but then you're an obvious exception to that. So anyways, all that to say, I wish I was doing more public programs so I could be disclosing more reports. Arguably, I could be asking private programs about disclosure, but it's just, it's time consuming, right?
Yeah.
So you look for the path of least resistance. So I mean, I want to say a big thank you, because I've sat there and Yahoo's a program that's on my list of ones that I want to hit, right? And so to see you kind of come out of nowhere, and really not just like find bugs, but like absolutely find great bugs, right? Like the ones that we've talked about here are super impressive to me. So thanks for taking the time to do that, and obviously just share that back. On that note, from your success, have you found that people have reached out to you and been looking for help and guidance on bug bounties?
Yeah, definitely. Every once in a while I'll get a DM exactly like the one I sent, and I kind of laugh at it a little bit, but I'll usually interact with those hackers and kind of first thing I'll do is kind of motivate them to spend some time on their own trying to figure it out. I feel like if you just help every person that comes to you like directly, I feel like it kind of creates an idea that they should come to people for every issue they have. But that kind of contradicts what I said where I came to someone else for help. But I feel like there's a way to help people out, and that's one, say like, okay, have you looked into this? And you drop them a couple URLs and say, these should be able to help you out. Just dig deep into these a little bit, read them, and sometimes it'll be like the RFC for OAuth or whatnot, and things like that. And then if they have more comments or questions, they'll come back and say, okay, well, I understand this, but I feel like it isn't addressed in this. So then I'll like go and help them out, and I think it's a great way to collaborate with people. So yeah.
That it's funny you mentioned that, like the difference between kind of helping people as opposed to like guiding people. It's a theme that's come up routinely in these interviews with people who have a similar experience in the past, where they looked for help but they couldn't find it, and now wanting to give back. To differentiate between wanting to tell a person how to hack as opposed to a person coming and saying, "Hey, I've tried A, B, and C, it's not working. Do you know what D could be?" And then getting that feedback. And Franz Rosen even mentioned it, H1702 in the interview that they did there. He echoed it. File descriptors brought it up. There's been a number of people who have said that they're more inclined to help somebody who wants to help themselves. So it's interesting to hear you say that as well. And I hope people take that to heart, listening to these, and hopefully they're providing some value in that perspective.
Exactly.
You've also mentioned publicly about wanting to help people in high school specifically, and try to get them into this. And why? Why is that a goal for you?
Okay, so like in high school, I think I really wanted to collaborate with people who, it's kind of a crazy idea, but like, collaborate with hackers and whatnot, and people my age, and that really doesn't exist in high school that much, but there are people who are interested in information technology, and there is another group of people who are potentially interested in security, but there's just no way for them to express themselves. During high school, I really didn't have a way to like voice my interest that was validated. That's why I think bug bounties are so appealing to me, actually, is because like you get immediate recognition from teams for finding like a great vulnerability, but while you're in high school and like you don't know bug bounties exist, there's no real output for hey, I found this vulnerability in something that has a responsible disclosure program, and someone says, oh, great job. A lot of people just don't understand it, and it's such a specific field that not a whole lot of people invest time, especially like in a local community, for instance, for how to like validate and reward that. So I feel like being able to address and help high school students who are interested in, let's say, they get interested in like something that is potentially bad. Like let's say they look into direct denial service attacks and botnets and all that stuff, and they are really in love with it, but they don't know the whole legal side to it, that you can make a living by doing this ethically, and there's so much more doing it ethically than there is maliciously. So I feel like by creating an open environment for like high school students and students to hopefully voice themselves and receive recognition, that it would be able to allow these students to progress into security and information technology, but ethically, legally, and have a productive kind of side to it where they can like meet and collaborate with people who are also doing it ethically, legally, and potentially like talk to companies like, for instance, Yahoo's triage team and people like that. I really want to see the day where like there are people participating, like high school students in like web server pen testing even, or things like that. And I feel like there needs to be like a more receptive side to that. So yeah, I'm really interested in hopefully doing something like that in the future.
Nice. That's awesome. It's really great to hear. There were a couple things that kind of popped into my head, but the first you kind of alluded to it, and I think it was a big draw and attraction for me as well. Is the idea, and maybe it's not 100%, but bug bounty community really seems like a meritocracy, right? Like it's if you do well, you kind of rise up, right? Like there's that immediate recognition that you talked about, not only from the program but also from the community, right? Like I know, for better or for worse, when I've had big bounties, I've had a lot of people reach out that I've never talked to before and be like, first, congrats, but then maybe not so good. What did you find? But as you do better, you're kind of more into the community. It opens doors. You have conversations with people you don't necessarily know before, and so it is a door opener, even from the career perspective, right? Like I wouldn't be at Shopify if it weren't for bug bounties and weren't for HackerOne and the other platforms. So that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, kudos to you for doing that. I'd love to see you kind of get that off the ground, and I'd love to help out if there's any way that I can.
Awesome, thanks.
So one of the other things that's on a similar note
is your mention of having kind of like side channel conversations with other hackers that are of similar age, right? The age range, at least in bug bounty form, is quite broad. So I'm curious, what does that look like for you when you're interacting with people who have been doing it for 10, 15 years, or even me doing it for a year, but maybe probably, let's not date myself, but maybe 10 years older than you. And then versus when you're having conversations with people that are kind of your own age, and quite frankly, might have more time to kind of sit down and dig into things with you in bug bounties. What's the difference there? What's the dynamic look like?
I think it's more of a social perspective when it comes to interacting with people your age, because these are people who are at the same stage you are, doing the exact same things you are with regards to starting college, high school, interest group, but when it comes to interacting with adults, I think it's a really great experience to be able to just practice professionality and stuff. Like, if you came in here at 17, never interacted with an adult, and you're just, I don't know, just kind of acting like you normally act, you're probably not going to go very far. So I feel like it's an awesome kind of experience to just collaborate for the future you, I guess, when it comes to, you're at a job or whatnot. I haven't really noticed any crazy differences working with adults. I think that the community is very responsive to understanding people's different experience levels. So if I come to someone and I'm like, hey, I have issue with this or whatnot, they're not going to say, oh, it's because you're 17, you don't understand this issue. What are you doing in bug bounty? Get out. Mm-hmm. So the community is really awesome at just understanding that people can have different experience levels at different ages, and it's different, but it's still the same when you're interacting with people of different ages. But the reason we create side channels for just people who are under 18 mainly is kind of just like a social thing. It's just I feel super comfortable working with these people, and it's cool to know that these are people who are Jack Capel is 17 years old, and I thought it was really awesome to meet him because I'm like, oh, I'm 17 as well, and we both have really similar interest groups, and just the social aspect, I guess.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And yeah, Jack's awesome. I was wickedly impressed with his success at H1702, and then obviously with what was it, Hack the Army or the Air Force? I can't remember which one it was.
Yeah, Hack the Air Force.
Yeah, exactly, the most recent one. I obviously didn't spend a lot of time there.
Yeah.
But maybe I should have. In terms of your learning, where do you go to kind of pick up new things and kind of expand the skill set? What does that look like for you?
For me, it's usually just running into something that I don't understand and then finding whatever documentation and stuff like that. Nobody really wants to sit in front of let's say I don't know, just documentation or RFCs for hours on end. But
unless
sometimes
you're file descriptor.
Yeah, unless you're file descriptor. Yeah, I read about his OAuth finding where he found I'm trying to remember what it was. I'm sure you remember. But anyway. When I want to learn new things, I'll just kind of find the resources. It's the internet. I mean, there's at least 24 places for any specific thing you want to look into. So I mean, you will find it if you put in the work to find it. Unless you're doing a CTF, for instance, that, you're kind of stuck for at least directly solving the issue. But most of the time, it's programming languages Jack showed me his Node.js thing in Las Vegas, and I was like, okay, this is super cool. I really like the syntax and the structure of this language. So now I just, whenever I'm bored and hit facebook.com, I stop myself and go to YouTube and watch Node.js videos.
So is there anything that you know now that you wish you knew when you started hacking?
Yeah, there's a bunch of stuff. I feel like there's a whole mindset when it comes to doing bug bounty programs, especially with a public bug bounty program, is that you should know what to look at and what not to look at, just from a convenience perspective. Of course, it's probably beneficial to test everything you can, but for instance, if there's a Boolean and a really, really public URL, you shouldn't try hitting it with cross-site scripting payloads, because just kind of assume it's already looked over. But I kind of wish I understood the whole side of the bug bounty where, I'm trying to find a way to phrase this, but just kind of knowing what to look at and knowing what not to look at, which when it comes to public programs is a really big thing, but in private programs that are just launched, it's not the same. because most of those programs haven't been touched or whatnot.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a pretty key point, but it's very nuanced, right? Like it's
Yeah.
when you're going after a private program, it's almost like if it's brand new, you can kind of just go wherever you want to go, right?
Yeah.
But public programs that are more mature, it's almost like there's that upfront mental investment in terms of where am I going to look that other people haven't looked. And that might not even be like an area of the website. It could be like a different type of vulnerability, right? I haven't had the chance to sit down with them, but like even like Ron, I think it's Chan, coming out and hitting Uber, where like he's risen up to number two, right? Like on a public program, and he's
Yeah.
gone out and he's found some pretty key findings, right? In my mind, that's where you sit down, you take a step back, and you think through what type of functionality or what type of like space on this site am I going to go after? It's not just kind of going in and hammering it. I'm glad you raised it because I know I've had conversations with people who are new and who are struggling through like finding vulnerabilities, and I think it's a tough lesson to learn, and you end up learning it later if you don't hear it explicitly like this, that hacking is not just sitting down and pounding away at the keyboard.
Yeah, completely. There was I think it's awesome that you said that approaching it with a different type of vulnerability or a different approach to it, because there have been some really, really, really public endpoints that have been like people have hit them to death of just like sending a scanner over and over and like manually looking at it for cross-site scripting and SQL injection and whatnot in Yahoo. And I took a different approach to it, and I think I did a write-up where like carriage return line feed injection in the emails, which is really awesome to do in Yahoo. And like I'd found a vulnerability in like a site that had like 2 open reports for that platform, and not like or not. I say that like but there were 2 public reports from a really, really, really long time ago when Yahoo had published the titles, and like I'm like, okay, there's no reason like people should have missed this. Like, why did people miss this? And I think it's just the methodology people have when they approach the application.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. So last question to kind of round it out, because we've covered just a ton of information, which is awesome, and I hope people find value in it. But on that same note, is kind of, do you have any advice for people that are getting into this, for new hackers, young and old?
Yeah, completely. I would definitely say, just to start off, is like don't give up. Like, you will find stuff. I think the hardest part about starting bug bounty is the mental barrier of there's so many good hackers here who find so many cool things, and I can't seem to find anything. Why can't I seem to find anything? And I think the differentiator is the time put into it, because when you look at an application, you will probably not find anything for a decent amount of time, at least when you're new. But there have been so many times where I will come back to the same page that I looked at 2 weeks ago, and I will just do the exact same things and then additional things that I've learned. And I kind of just like have a reapproach where I say, what have I learned and what can I find in this thing? And like, it's so much repetition and so much like reinvestment of time that like I would just say like don't give up, because it's so easy to just say like, oh, I'll look at this another time or whatnot, or oh, there's no more vulnerabilities left in this application. But so those things are just super untrue. Like, there's always going to be vulnerabilities in applications, because your hindsight's 20/20 when it comes to stuff like this. So if you see a public report about like a XSS on a page you were visiting like a week before, it kind of pisses you off, and you're like, why did I not see that? And then you're motivated for like 10 minutes to go back and look at that application. But like, just understand that like the people who are finding these things are digging super, super deep into the applications, and it can be stressful at first, but just like seriously, don't give up. Like, just put your time into it, and you'll get what you earn, or you get what you put in.
Yeah, exactly. I completely agree with you, and it's awesome to hear you say that. I know for me, when I started out, I spent an inordinate amount of time doing bug bounties, even where I was supposed to be doing like regular work jobs. And so, if you look at it in terms of like a years or days perspective, it was short for me to kind of at least get on to Hacker One's, was it top 50 or top 100? I can't remember what it was. But if you looked at it in terms of hours, like, it was an insane amount of time that was there. And I've recently had conversations with people where it's like I've laid out kind of what I was finding those first few months, and when I reflected back on it, like my first 3 months was like all NAs, and then it was informatives, and then it was like sprinkled in some resolves, and then it was all resolves, right? So that's why I find people like you with the story of immediate success to be pretty interesting, and it's awesome to hear you tell others to kind of stick with it, keep digging in. So yeah, Sam, that rounds it out for me. I really appreciate you taking the time to sit down and talk. I know we've gone over the hour, but like I said, I think I've got more questions that we could have dug into and made this a full second hour. So thanks very much for taking the time to sit down. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely. It was great talking to you.
Great. Have a good one.
You too. Thanks.